Emily Gray Tedrowe, the author of Blue Stars, Commuters, and now The Talented Miss Farwell. She has a PhD from NYU and a BA from Princeton. She received an Illinois Arts Council Award, as well as fellowships from Ragdale, Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and the Sewanee Writers Conference. Tonight, she'll be in conversation with the talented and wonderful Valerie Laken, the author of Dream House and Separate Kingdom, who is an associate professor of English at UWM. If I may quote Publishers Weekly's review of The Talented Miss Farwell, Tedrowe's zany, perfectly executed latest follows Becky Farwell, a controller in Pearson, Illinois, who uses the small town's budget to fund her double life as a renowned New York City art collector and dealer named Reba Farwell. Tedrowe does a spectacular job of demonstrating the mindset of a character who justifies criminal activity while believing she's ultimately good, as well as making the process of rationalization credible. The unusual plot and spirited execution makes this one sing. So if I had a better voice, I would sing your introduction, but I cannot. So I hand it over to Valerie Laken. Thank you all for coming. Give them a big hand.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's so nice to be here, and I'm so delighted to see so many people here tonight with us. I know it's a busy time of year for a lot of us, although we're coming down from the holidays. But I am so happy to see Emily like on my screen. I always feel like people are coming out of their computer like into my room where I spend all my time. Emily and I go way back. I think we've been friends for at least 10 years. And I read this novel in manuscript a long time ago, like as a, I don't know, it's years ago though. It was a very different version, but it was such a joy to read it again in book form. And I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you tonight, Emily, about it. Would you just start off maybe by telling us a little bit about the book and reading a little bit from it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so psyched to see you, Valerie. This is so great. And of course, you're just one of my dearest friends and favorite writers. So I'm so thankful you could do this. And Daniel's introduction was amazing. And I just can't wait till we can all get together again and, I don't know, shop for books and then get a coffee or something. So this will have to do for now. But yes, I think Daniel sort of slid it in that I wrote an accidental thriller, and I like that. I really like that. I might steal that. I wrote this novel, which is about a woman who leads a double life. When I was inspired by a true story that happened in a small town here in Illinois. I'm in Chicago, and some of you in the Midwest may recognize the story of a woman from a town called Dixon, Illinois. And so one day, I think it was in the mid-2000s, I was driving the kids, carpooling my kids somewhere. I was on Lakeshore Drive, and a breaking news alert came on NPR describing how the FBI had made this big, dramatic arrest of a woman at a small government town, a small government in a township, and that she was being indicted for embezzling $50 million, what would turn out to be $50 million over 20 years. And so, of course, this was all very shocking, and I was interested. But then the thing that kind of grabbed me as a writer was when the news reporter mentioned that the FBI had held off of arresting the woman for several weeks, even after they had evidence that she had committed this crime, because, as they put it, they didn't believe she could have committed it alone as a woman. They were looking essentially for her male co-conspirator or her boss, which they never found, because she did pull off this, sort of what would turn out to be this epic historic crime on her own. And so that obsessed me for some reason. I think that I immediately found myself drawn to the idea of somebody who leads that double life in their small town and continues to pull off this sort of secret crime while also showing up to work, showing up to church, going to a neighbor's barbecue, and all the time she's taking this money from them. What I did though was I stopped, I don't know if you do this, Valerie, but I stopped following the actual news of the real story. I stopped reading anything about the facts of the story so that I could kind of build my own world and make up my own character. So I like to say it's loosely inspired, but I never met anyone related to the true story. And in the real story, the woman took this money and put it into a horse breeding business or a horse showing business. And I'm a city girl and I don't know anything about horses, so I knew I wasn't going to write that. But I had always wanted to set a novel in the art world. So that's what my character does. She steals this money to fund her sort of renowned private art collection. I think maybe, are you on mute? Oh, okay.
Got it. Sorry. You'd think by now I'd be okay with that. No, it's really such a fascinating read and such a fun read. Like it's a really interesting combination of kind of comedy and you get that sense of dread that you get whenever you watch somebody who's on a bit of a downward spiral doing bad deed after bad deed and constantly hoping she'll redeem herself. And you feel that sense of like, oh God, how can this possibly end well? How can this, where's she going to end up? And that's, the real pleasure of reading this book. Would you be willing to read us a little of it?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. How about I'll read just the first page and a half to give you a little taste of where we start and where we meet the character. Her name is Becky Farwell. And so she's growing up in a very small town I call Pearson, Illinois, and this is 1979. So let's see the first page or two. 14-year-old Becky Farwell lay on the truck horn with her forearm. Daddy, let's go. Engine running, she tilted the rear view to study her eye makeup, a wash of greens running dark to light from her eyelashes to eyebrows. Greens, of course, because all the magazines said all redheads had to, even indistinct blonde red mixes like her own. What she really wanted was the set that gave you 3 kinds of purple, pale violet to dusky eggplant. Becky ran a quick calculation on how much she was owed by the 4 girls she did homework for, geometry and algebra, although she could stretch up to pre-calc too, even as a 9th grader. Though for pre-calc, all she could guarantee was a B, not that any of the girls complained. Sometimes she took payment in shoes, like the almost new Tretorns she had on now, without socks because no one did. Becky flipped the mirror back with a snap. They needed cash too bad to daydream about makeup. Getting squeezed at all ends. One of her father's sayings that didn't make sense, but sure as hell got across how bad it was that spring. After another minute, she jumped down from the truck and went inside. Even though it was one of the first nice days in March, the front rooms of their farmhouse were dark and stuffy, closed in. Becky pushed up a window and propped it open with a can of beans. This morning's cereal bowls were tumbled milky white in the sink, and a thin, sticky layer of grease and dust filmed everything, but Becky had no time to wipe it up. In the family room, one patch of carpet stood out darker and new. Last week, her father had pawned the TV set, all her mother's jewelry, he thought all, Becky had hidden a few bits, and the blender. He wouldn't tell her how much he'd gotten, it's only temporary, but the crumpled receipt she'd found proved it was less than 100. Daddy, she called from the bottom of the stairs, then ran up lightly, bracelets jingling. Have you not even showered? For there he was, her bear-like father, curled on his side in bed, his silver hair mashed down low over his forehead, perspiration speckling his nose. Stomach flu, but there was no time for it. A buyer was driving in from Rockford, and her father was supposed to meet him at noon. You said just turn on the engine. Daddy, it's already... He groaned and threw a hand over his eyes. Show him the drills, the light track air seeder, make sure he sees that one. And the spreaders, even if he says he don't. I can't. Becky looked wildly around the room. How am I supposed to? Tell him not the Massies or any John Deere. You can walk him back by the 2 Vicons, he'll want those. But just say no. Just drills, that's our deal. Give me an hour, most. I just need to, oh God. He bolted from bed to bathroom, old terry cloth robe flying, and Becky fled before she could hear anything. So I'm gonna stop there.
So fun. I love these opening chapters, especially. It seems to me that, in case people haven't realized, I'm going to try very hard not to give away any spoilers, but in case you haven't guessed from all the introductions, this is a book where a character does a lot of misdeeds. which is part of what makes it really fun. And I want to ask you more questions about that later. But obviously, one of the tricky things, it seems to me, about writing about a character who is misbehaving is, especially when they're the protagonist, they're the point of view character, is like, how do you get the reader on board enough with that character that we get invested in them? And it seems, I think you do a lot of really smart things in the early chapters, not just in that part that you just read, but things that happen while she's still quite young that really endear her to me and make me feel with her and kind of root for her early on. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the choices you made in those early chapters to kind of get readers invested and show her in a more like more vulnerable position.
Yeah, I like that word, vulnerable. This is a person who has these sort of outsized gifts of intelligence and drive and math ability, in a place where she's really hemmed in by her circumstances. She is not expected as a young woman of that time and place to be very ambitious, but she is burning with ambition. And so I think one of the things I did in the first few chapters was to show sort of what she dreamed of and how that ends up being sort of fenced in by some things that happen in her family. You know, she grows up without a mother, and you know, then some stuff happens with her father's health and his business, and so she is sort of she's sort of made to step up and help him in a way that is beyond her years. She essentially saves his business and isn't able to go to college in the way she had wanted. So I think that those things really, to me, point out, it's kind of like an origin story, almost like not a superhero origin story, but like the bad guy origin story, maybe, in a way, or maybe she's both the superhero and the bad guy. But she has this fire and she has nowhere to put it. You know, she has this math ability without the proper channel for it. So in a way, she begins her misdeeds from a place of goodness, from a place of sort of dreams and imagination and wanting a lot for herself, wanting to succeed. And I also need to mention that she is a girl and then a young woman in a place and a time where she's really expected to be more of a domestic person, more homebound, more of a good daughter, more of a, you know, a sort of a end up as a wife. You know, she's not expected to be this kind of business mogul that she will eventually kind of mold herself into. And she's certainly not expected to be this kind of criminal mastermind, which is the path that she will eventually kind of set herself on. So I guess, yeah, we kind of need to buy into this character because, as you said, if you're going to ask a reader to follow you along a journey that takes place over many years and stay with this one point of view character, we have to believe or like some things about her to take that journey, or at least to be interested in her, I thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's some really interesting kind of Me Too moments in the early chapters where, you know, when she first, in the very first kind of like accounting error that she discovers in City Hall, and she tries to go to her bosses and tell them that she's found this mistake and she wants to fix it and make it right. And nobody will hear her. And, you know, it's very, you know, reading it from a 21st century woman's perspective, I'm like, yeah, take the money. Like, I get so angry with her bosses. I'm like, you take the money, girl. I mean, and it's funny how with that one move, the reader, as a reader, you know, you're crossing that line with her. There's, you know, ultimately it's just it's a matter of degrees, whether it's right or wrong to steal $500 from your city or to steal, you know, $50 million. And it's so, I thought it was so clever that, like, having her be so young and so kind of beleaguered and having the amount be so small in that first little gesture, it's like you just lure us right across the boundary with her and suddenly we're in. Yeah, I was wondering, you know, another thing that to me makes Becky so compelling is just how competent she is, like how, as you were saying, like how skillful she is, how smart, how driven she is. And so it, you know, before too long, we realized that she could probably have succeeded in any field. And that to me is kind of like the book's tragedy, is that, you know, she didn't have, I mean, she feels she had to do this. And I guess in certain ways for her time period, her option and her class, you know, her options were quite limited. But but she could have succeeded in so many ways, but she is, you know, because she's this talented Miss Farwell, like, you know, she just feels like she could do almost anything. She has this magnetism and this savvy and this sharpness. I was wondering, you know, like, on the one hand, as a reader, it's just pleasurable. I think it's always fun to watch somebody doing what they love very well, right? I think this is why, like, athletes on TV always look gorgeous, no matter, they always look way better when they're like sweating on court than they do when they're dressed up with makeup or whatever, because I just think people look good. They you know, they exude something when they're doing what they love very well. And so the book is, you know, in many ways showing us her every day doing that at work, you know, in the office at City Hall, and doing that in the art market. And so it's a pleasure to get to watch her do what she does so well. But at the same time, it's this sort of guilty pleasure because what she's doing is wrong, right?
Right.
I was wondering,
I totally agree. Like, I love like uber competency in novels and movies. Like, I love to watch people who are so good at something, and, you know, everyone knows it, and like they get the ball, like you said, in the clutch moment, and they're the one who takes the 3-point, am I saying the right sports thing? They take the 3-point shot. So I loved writing Becky so she has these 2 lives. And like you said, one is in town hall, where she's known as like the person who gets it done. Like, if the budget's running over, you know, she's the one who fixes it. If they don't have money for the Little League team, she finds a way. She organizes the town to, you know, do this 24-hour relay to save their local track, which, by the way, is something my dad did in my own hometown. So I kind of stole that. That was a little life moment. But so she's this beloved citizen in her tiny town because she has never left. She didn't go away to college. She didn't move away. She stayed. And it's sort of a town that's on the decline, right? Like a lot of towns in the Midwest, like a lot of the industrial belt towns. But her drive and her energy sort of energizes the town, her fellow community. And she loves being that beloved sort of kind of like uber citizen Becky. But then, you know, when she enters the art world, she is at a loss at first, you know, because she doesn't know how the social codes work, right? She doesn't know how to talk to somebody to buy a painting. She thinks if you have the money, there should be no problem. You should just be able to point to what you see on the wall and buy it. But she doesn't realize, of course, that it's a lot of who you know, and that it's a very sort of different social and class coded arena in which she hasn't been in. But I think Becky being Becky, she takes that as a challenge and she wants to crush it there as well. So she is also gonna sort of own that that place as well. But to me, it was really fun to show her kind of as a fish out of water, or I guess as like a small fish in a large pond, trying to understand, you know, the ins and outs of this big city stuff, coming from like this sort of rural small town background that she has.
Yeah. I'm curious. You know, I think that before I read this book, I know you love art. We've gone to a lot of art museums and galleries together. I love art, but I have to say that, like, reading this book for like the first half of the book, I was like, oh, it's so cool to learn all this interesting stuff about how the art world really works and how art is really traded and dealt. And then by the end of it, I was like, kind of disenchanted by the art, you know, by all this insight into the art world. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you gathered all that information, because it feels like a lot of it is kind of insider, or at least just stuff that, like, you know, one can appreciate art and study art and not know how the art market really works. And that's the part that I think you get, so you capture so deep, with such detail and such kind of interesting insight. And it seems like there's a lot of you know, just sort of like posturing and status stuff, and, you know, a certain level of vanity and commercialism. And I was wondering if you could just talk about how you gathered that information and whether it changed your attitude or your feelings about art.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, you know, I definitely wanted Becky to be somebody who appreciated art from an owning point of view, right? Because she is this business person, and she understands money and she understands finances and numbers. I knew that when she realized that she had this passion for visual art, which kind of strikes her almost like a lightning bolt. You know, she hasn't grown up around people who appreciate art or even have access to a lot of art, but it hits her like a lightning bolt. But I wanted her to be much more on this side of like, owning is the only way to be in that game. And for her, buying the art is the rush. And so I brought money into it, and I made money the main focus of her relationship with art. And to be a great owner of art, as I kind of learned by, well, I'll explain later, but I did a lot of lurking on various, like, I don't know, websites and stuff. You kind of have to be somebody who sells a lot of art. You can't just buy, you need to sell to fund your collection. And so, of course, what a lot of the top collectors do is make savvy buys and then, you know, sell them at a profit and use that to fund the next piece. And so there is a little bit of sort of I don't know, a less aesthetic or a less pure sensibility about it. And I think what I tried to do with Becky's journey is to kind of take her from sort of the innocent, new to the arena to becoming this mega shark dealer, to becoming sort of a little bit disenchanted with it herself and kind of boxed in towards the end when she, you know, really has nowhere left to go, no more big deals to make. But yeah, so for research, it's funny because I think I lucked out in that, like you said, you know, you and I really like visual art. We've gone to see stuff together. We've talked about it. We have friends who are visual artists. We've been to artist colonies together where there were painters. So we got to kind of like creep on them and watch their process and stuff. And so that was already an interest of mine. So I feel like I had this kind of, you know, background of general knowledge about it. And I've always sort of like kept my eye out for those articles that, you know, pop up in Vanity Fair. And I used to get a subscription to Art Forum just to look, you know, not for any real reason. I think that when I write and I need to give a character a thing, an occupation or a passion or a background, I often look for something that I myself have been interested in just as a kind of as a bystander, because you already have some stuff going on. You already have some basic knowledge. And then when I knew, okay, she's going to be X kind of collector and she's going to go to these cities and she's going to go to these big art fairs, then I could go specifically to the internet and, you know, kind of lurk around various chat boards. I guess that's what they were called in the olden days, but like chat boards and websites to pick up, you know, a little bit of the lingo, a little bit of the vibe. I think that one of the things that I sometimes say that makes people, you know, maybe readers feel a little bit uncomfortable is like, I'm not sure all of this is like totally correct. I mean, I made it up a lot of the time, you know, I made it up and hopefully it passes the sniff test, but I am definitely not an art collector and I'm not really in that business. But, you know, a lot of the job of fiction is, you know, you have an idea of what you want something to be, and then you kind of, you fake it until it feels right. And then you kind of hope that it does, and you test it later. I don't know. Did I just like that? Is that at all your experience, Valerie, or did I just give something away that's very embarrassing?
No, that's absolutely it. I mean, it's you're just trying to lie well and
Yes.
lie to the point where it feels real enough to you and other people believe it. And I believed it. Did you feel like you became disenchanted with like your understanding of the art world?
Yeah, it's hard not to. I mean, so much of the if you read, you know, the news, or like art market news that makes the papers, it's like this sort of like, you know, cartoonish like version of capitalism run amok. I mean, you'll hear about, you know, pieces that sell, you know, hundreds of times more than they were expected to, and then will plunge in value the next year. And I have a scene where Becky has pulled off what she thinks is going to be one of the biggest deals of her career. She's held on to these, you know, sort of certain works and until they've risen in value, and she sold them at just the right moment at a giant auction at Christie's. And then at the party afterward, someone comes up to her and says, oh, so let's go next week when they're doing the housewares. And she's like, what? And the guy's like, oh, you know, when they do the silver housewares, and he's talking about, you know, sort of buying and selling tea sets and grapefruit spoons from the past, and collecting other things. And she's a little bit stunned that maybe, is that where she's ended up? You know, she started as someone who just loves visual art, and is she now in a place where it's really all just about flipping a commodity in order to make a profit? So yeah, it's hard not to be a little disenchanted, honestly.
Yeah, that's what I cracked up in the book. I mean, there were a lot of moments in the book where I was really grinning and like laughing to myself. And one of the great moments was when she's like shopping with her best friend's daughter, and her best friend's daughter is trying to collect like just the last one of those fuzzy toys in a set that she doesn't have. And like, and Becky has this insight of like, you know, that's going to change, just about collecting in general. I don't want to give it away too much, but I just thought that was, you know, that was such an interesting trajectory where she goes from loving art to loving the process of collecting, which to me, collecting in that way has always kind of baffled me just a little bit, that thing of people collecting whatever, like bottle caps or, you know, paperweights or whatever. I have some of these people in my family line, and it doesn't always make sense to me, but it was such an interesting analogy there.
Yeah, I think it's a really appealing way of life. I don't think I have any like active collecting, but I get it, because there's something about sort of fitting in that last piece, or like obtaining the last piece to sort of like complete a collection that gives you like utter mastery over something in life, right? And that maybe there's this sense of finality, or that you've now finished something or completed it. And I play with that a little bit later in the novel, because that's kind of the place where she comes to in her art collecting world. But yeah, you see it in kids. I mean, you know, there's like, isn't that what a lot of products are kind of meant to do, is to get you to, whether it's those, what is it, those cards, like not Minecraft, but oh my gosh, my nephew would kill me. He's obsessed with that. You know, do you know what I'm talking about? Somebody in the audience is going to type it in there. You know, those cards. Oh, is it Pokemon? I think it's Pokemon. I
think so.
That it's all based on like getting the certain amount of the things in the right, you know, order, the ones that you don't have. So Becky's essentially playing a very high stakes game of Pokemon, I think.
So do you think that would you classify it as an addiction or a seduction?
Oh my God, I love that question. It's so funny, because I was just looking at a collection of Elizabeth Hardwick essays called Seduction and Betrayal, and it's her collection of essays on women's lives and in the writing world, like Zelda Fitzgerald, and I was thinking about that word seduction and how it's so layered. I mean, I think that Becky enters this and is utterly seduced by her physical need to own these paintings. I think that she feels it so much as a physical force that the crimes that she commits, the way she begins to steal from that first amount of money, and then it spirals, it snowballs. I think that is acceptable to her because of the force that she feels like she needs to own these. And she is enthralled to that. I think she is, you know, serving it in a way that it's like a sort of a need she has. But yeah, later on, I believe that the word addiction would probably be fitting. I mean, it's something that can begin to ruin her life. It certainly damages her main relationships. It will be the source of a lot of pain for many, many people. So absolutely, it has some elements of addiction, I would say. In the fact that she can't stop too, you know?
And she keeps thinking she's going to fix it, that like she's going to.
Just one more, just one more.
Maybe she does, I don't, you know, she might. You know, for most of the book, this is kind of related. For most of the book, I guess for basically all the books, she has almost no romantic entanglements. Like she's almost asexual in certain ways. And that was so intriguing to me. She seems really averse to emotional attachments. She has very few deep friendships, except for her friend Ingrid, her best friend, who is in some ways like a foil for her. Is sort of like the same small town young woman who ended up kind of living the more expected conventional life in their town, and is in some ways like the moral kind of heart of the story. And we watch how the damage to the city affects her life personally. And I thought that was so powerfully done. But I was wondering if that was a conscious, like, I think that in a book this long, it's over maybe 20 years of her life. From, I think she's 14 or so on the first page.
Yeah, you're
as a
right.
teenager. And, so she, through all of the years when we would expect any character to have at least one great love, right? One great romance. And instead, you chose to follow this great friendship that she has with Ingrid. And it's not, I don't mean to imply that it's sexual at all. They're just pure friends. And I was wondering if that was like a deliberate choice, or if it just sort of sort of emerged naturally, that you decided to focus not on, because I think when somebody's living a double life, obviously the thing that they come up against is if you're living as an imposter with two lives, you really are only having a half life in either one of those lives, and you can't be fully truthful to anyone in either of those lives, or you'll get found out. And so that puts a limit to how much or how deeply your relationships can be in any one of your lives. And so, the place where that would generally be tested would be, either with a romantic interest or a great friendship, or maybe a family member. So I was wondering if was that choice to focus on a friendship rather than a romance intentional, or did it just kind of evolve? And could you talk more about that?
Yeah, I love that question. And I mean, it was very intentional on my part to have Becky put all of her passion into a non-romantic relationship. And in this case, I mean her relationship with this art and with pursuing it. And I'll talk about Ingrid in a minute, because she is important to me and to the novel. But, it struck me when I was starting to write this story, and I wanted to focus on like a female character like Breaking Bad, or, kind of leading this criminal double life, that our main narrative for that in popular culture is often the story of a woman sort of betraying her relational status. Like, for example, a wife who cheats on her husband, or a woman who leaves her kids, or in other ways, like a woman who's, Breaking Bad consists of who she is as a mother or wife or daughter or family member. And I really sort of wanted to focus on like the non-relational aspects for Becky's life. I wanted her to live out the drama of a relationship, but to have it be a relationship of obsession with pursuing this art and what it takes to get it. And so that was very intentional. I knew I didn't want her to, I knew that she was going to spend all of that, every iota of that energy into her activity, she calls it. She gives it this private name. She calls it the activity. But she is not, a robot, and she's not somebody who doesn't care about other people. And she does have this connection to this woman, Ingrid. And I really like how you frame her as a foil and like the moral heart of the novel. And the story with Ingrid is that she was a much smaller character, I think, in an earlier draft of the book, maybe even the one you read. And over time, it seemed to me more and more important to show how their friendship grows. I really do like writing about women's friendships. It's just sort of a pleasure for me to explore in fiction. And also to show the real sort of human fallout, the damage that's done from Becky's, sort of leeching the town of money over these many years. I can write about how the town pool goes dry for 3 years because they don't have enough money to fund it. And I can talk about how the crumbling Riverwalk damages the sort of, historic beauty of the town. But I think we only really feel, the pain of Becky's crime when it comes to a character like Ingrid. And I won't, give away how that plays out. But I ended up writing a few scenes towards the end of the novel later on in the revision process where, Becky is really made to face directly through someone she loves, how very much, she has hurt this person through her intentional actions and through her unintentional actions. So that was how that all played out.
Mm-hmm. One thing, I'm trying to decide which question to go to next, because that could take me in several directions, and I have a lot of questions here. And also, just as a heads up, Just as a heads up to everybody, in like 5 or 10 minutes, we'll open this up to your questions too. So if you are thinking of questions, you can type them into the chat at any time, and then we'll turn to the chat space in 5 or 10 minutes. I was wondering, and now I lost my train of thought. I was wondering if, like, one of the things that happened to me as I was reading it was, and this reminded me a little bit of that Lawrence Weschler nonfiction book called Boz. Have you read that?
Oh, I don't think I have.
Anybody would love this book. I'll put it in the chat space in a little while, but
Please.
it's called Boz, B-O-Z-Z, by Lawrence Weschler. And it's about this artist who, it's a true story about this artist who draws replicas of money. Like he does these hand-written, hand-drawn like replicas of $50 bills, $100 bills, or and then he goes, and his project is to spend them.
Okay.
Like he'll go to a restaurant and have a wonderful meal, and at the end of the meal, when he's having his coffee, he'll start putting the finishing touches on this, you know, exact true to life size, you know, $100 bill. And the waiter will come over with the check, and he'll be like, "Oh, what are you drawing there?" And he'll say, "Well, it's interesting you asked, because I was hoping that I could use this to pay for my meal." And then the waiter's like, "Oh God, you know, what am I going to do with this?" And Weschler, Boggs is like, "No, if you want an actual $100 bill, I'll give you that instead. I'm perfectly fine with that. But if you would like, you know, I would also pay with this piece of art." And the waiter, sometimes the waiter will be like, "Oh, okay, yeah," and Boggs will say, you know, "But you'd have to give me the change. Like you have to use it as currency." And apparently he lived a whole year of his life just on the money that he had drawn. And he said that his father was like an investor, and that his father saw one of his paintings that said, it was like a huge painting of $1 bill or something, and where it says "In God We Trust" or whatever, it said, "I promise to promise to promise to promise to promise." And like all of his art is based on this understanding that like money and art have this in common, which is it's all based on a system of belief in the value of something that doesn't have really any intrinsic value, right? And so I found myself, as I was reading, you know, I love that your novel does something really similar, which is that it made me start to really get uneasy about the way that money moves through large organizations like governments. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist or anything. I believe in government, but I was like, wow, the way that she can move money through all of these municipal accounts, and nobody understands it or knows it or picks up on it for decades. And that's based on reality. And it just starts to make you feel like the ground is shifting under your feet, and you're sort of like, wow, can I trust anything? Was that like was that a part of the messaging that you consciously were pursuing, and did you think a lot about that?
I mean, you just like kicked off a million thoughts in my head there, but the thing that really resonates is that idea of money and art as both like pure symbol, right? Pure, like a value that's sort of based on our agreeing or not what value something has. And it's very visible in the art market that value can shift on a dime, haha. Or, you know, like I think about, there's a scene early in the book where Becky really wants to buy this Eric Fischl painting. Eric Fischl is a real artist, and a very well-known one of the top artists in America. And and she's unable to do so because she wants it so badly, and she's so new to it that she makes all these mistakes in trying to own this piece of art. And she doesn't know the right people, and she hasn't gone through the proper channels, but she wants it so badly, and she fails. And then later on in her career, 10 or 15 years later, she acquires an Eric Fischl through a series of deals in which one painting is sold for another, and the Eric Fischl piece comes to her residence boxed up, and she never unboxes it, and soon it's gone in another deal that she works. And she has this reflection that the trick to owning an Eric Fischl, it turns out, is to not care very much at all about owning an Eric Fischl. And so she's learned this sort of painful truth about the value of something, and how you know, her desire for it both does and doesn't factor into whether she can own this piece of art. And your other comment about moving all this money in and out of the channels of the government, you know, was something that I definitely thought about. You know, she is the arbiter of the money, and she's the one who's sort of the self-proclaimed expert at all these kind of confusing accounts that the town government has, and what money goes in and what money comes out. And I think that you're right. Like, one of the things the town does is absolve its responsibility of looking so closely at it because of the force of her personality. And, you know, she's a con artist to a large degree. She has sort of built this this belief in her by, you know, with her competency. And I think in a lot of times we are all too willing to not question facts and truths because of personality. And I definitely think that Becky makes a concerted effort to exploit that in order to continue, you know, her activity, to continue her crime. I think you're on mute. Maybe take a look. Are you down on mute?
Sorry. Jeez. What do you think is the kind of like experience in a reader of watching a character? What is that weird pleasure that we take in watching a character do wrong? Do like more daring, thrilling, wrong moves than we ourselves have the courage to do? And is it more fun to write that than to write a character doing
so much more fun? So fun. I loved it. I loved watching her write. I mean, watching her, making her, you know, do these giant, pull off these giant, crazy, stressful things. And for me, one of the things I wanted to create in the reader was that tension between, oh my God, is she going to get caught? And wait, she probably should get caught, you know? So I wanted to bring us very close into the experience of what it feels like to almost be on the precipice of losing everything, and to try to hold it all together with all the force of her will and her intellect and her energy, while at the same time we recognize that what she's doing is bad and wrong, and that it does need to stop. And I'd like to play with that line. You know, I really wanted to kind of make people uncomfortable, because I myself really feel like, even though when I watch a character or read a character who is doing wrong things, I internalize so deeply their own experience, and that I feel like my heart starts to pound when the police car, you know, sort of like turns behind them as they're driving down the street. And I feel like that's my answer when someone might tell me, you know, oh, how, I mean, no one really says it to my face, but if someone were to say, like, you know, why should I read, you know, 300 pages about some woman stealing stuff? Like, that is not cool. That's not a good thing to do. And I guess I would say because, you know, as a human, we can really empathize with her fear and her tension and her terror at having everything come crashing down. Because for us, for most people who aren't these, you know, epic criminals and don't have a double life, we know what it's like when, you know, things come crashing down. And so I think that hopefully readers can enjoy both the big, you know, crimes she's pulling off, as well as that tension of, you know, oh my God, am I going to get caught? Or is this the thing that's going to bring me down? Or is there that one error that's going to pull the thread that unravels the entire situation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's like we have a vested interest in both sides of the outcome, right? We kind of want her to get away with it, but we kind of, like, in the real world, we're sort of like, she can't get away with it. This would be like, what would things mean if she got away with it?
Right, absolutely.
I have one or two other questions, but so if anybody has questions that you'd like to ask, I invite you to type them into the chat space, and we will see them there, and I will pitch them to Emily. But until we see those, I have a few more questions for Emily. One question that I am curious about is just what kind of like literary models or reference points you had in mind as you wrote or revised the book. Obviously, it's called The Talented Miss Farwell, which brings to mind the talented Mr. Ripley. She is kind of like a modern day Becky Sharp from Thackeray's Vanity Fair. She's Machiavellian.
She was named after Becky Sharp, by the way. I definitely stole that from Thackeray.
Cool. So could you talk a little bit about like the various influences or models that you had in mind and what you took from them, or what you decided, no, that's not going to work in a 20th or 21st century context?
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned the title, and the title came late to me in the process. I feel like you and I talk about this. Like, I feel like the title of a novel either comes to you like the first day you start writing it, or in my case, usually it's like agony, and the file in my computer is called like art novel for like years, and I can't even tell anyone, in this case, I think I sold it without a title. But I had a list on my bulletin board, which I'm looking at behind the computer, of things to keep in mind, stories to keep in mind. And one of them was Patricia Highsmith's series about Tom Ripley, the talented, I always say the talented Miss Farwell now, but the talented Mr. Ripley. And so when I hit on the name, I was really excited to kind of give that nod, hopefully that people would pick up it was like an homage, not that I think I'm, some Patricia Highsmith, but also to play with the gender aspect and to kind of emphasize that here we have a female con. We have, many stories of con artists who are men, and here I wanted to really kind of front and center a female con. But I also had a couple other random quotes and ideas on that bulletin board, and one of them was the Bob Dylan line, "To live outside the law, you must be honest." And then I had a quote from, in Game of Thrones, there's a character called the Hound. Do you watch Game of Thrones? Did you watch Game of Thrones? You know the Hound, right? The big,
big guy.
The big guy. And he says something like, every outlaw or every criminal has to have a code, or something like that. And so I wanted Becky to be the kind of criminal that built her own code, that had her own sort of ideas of what's right and not right while she did it. And then in terms of literary stuff, I guess that wasn't super literary. What else was I thinking of? I can't remember right now, but I do know that I chose The Custom of the Country by Edith Wharton as my as a little epigraph quote at the beginning, because I really love the way that in that story, her protagonist is definitely not a good person. And so her and Becky Sharp were models for me about women that we could really care about without having them be good people. So I would say that the Edith Wharton novel, The Custom of the Country, as well as Thackeray's Vanity Fair, were really important to me, thinking about social climbers and women who needed and depended on money and had to use their wiles to get it. And that we could enjoy such people as full people, as, characters as full people, even though they're women, Imagine.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, I love that as a woman reading. I mean, to me, I feel like we don't ask these questions about male protagonists nearly as often. And so I think that, we need more stories where women have the full range of possibilities for misbehavior, because that doesn't make somebody uninteresting. It makes them in many ways more interesting, and it doesn't make them unappealing. I mean, people can be very appealing while they do wrong.
Okay,
and I don't think that, for much of the book, she doesn't really seem to think she's doing wrong. Like, there's a lot of, I don't know if she's living, I know she's living outside the law. I don't know if she's honest, because I feel like there's a certain amount of self-deception in it, but I find those moments really juicy, like I think what is that great line from The Big Chill where Jeff Goldblum says, "I couldn't get out of bed without one or two good juicy rationalizations," right?
Oh,
like,
I love that.
That's how she is, she's constantly like sort of telling herself she's gonna make it right.
Yeah, she's deluding herself to the extent that, she feels like by plugging some money back into the town, she's, keeping things even. And she has these crazy sort of rules, say, she'll deliver, groceries to 3 families in town if the budget ends in 3 cents, or maybe she'll, donate $100 to the Little League town if she steals $100 that day. So she's constantly sort of playing with these little rules and ideas she has about what's right in order to keep maybe rationalizing to herself why she can continue doing this.
Yeah, totally, totally. I love that. We have some great questions over here, so I'm gonna read you some of these questions one by one. Susie T has said, what about her relationship with the town? She loves the town, but why? And one thing that I haven't yet said to the rest of the room is that I am from this area. I'm from Rockford, Illinois, which gets many mentions in the book, and I get such a thrill out of that. But these are my people. I understand a lot of them. And I found this on the web. Sorry, my phone just started talking to me. I must have said something that sounded like Siri. But what about her relationship with the town? She loves the town, but why? Does she really love the town? I don't know.
I mean, I remember I was nervous for you to read this. I was like, you know, because I mean, the best part about Valerie is her students and her friends who share writing with her know is that, you know, her honesty and like, you know, you're just, as you put it to me, you're brutally honest. And, you know, I've been on the end of that. And it's exactly what I want when I give you something to read. So I am not born and raised Midwestern. I'm a transplant. I've been here for about 20 years. I grew up on the East Coast, but I think this is like my first true Midwestern novel. You know, it's set in and around this small town in the Chicago area. And to me, I think being, I guess, an outsider, even though 20 years, I don't know, but I'm still an outsider, you know, I am able to see it with a little bit of a perspective. You know, I have a little bit of a distance perspective on it. And yet I also grew up in a small town, different from the one that I create here. But I think to answer the question, I think that Becky is in love with the town for a lot of the warm fuzzies that she gets from the people there. You know, she is this beloved citizen. She saves her father's business at a very young age with this kind of like genius financial plan idea she comes up with. So she's taken in sort of by these kind of men in the agribusiness world in which her father's business operated. And I think that she quickly acquires a reputation that becomes pretty central to her identity. She also meets Ingrid. And she and Ingrid really like to do volunteer efforts through their church. And they both get a kick out of doing things well. And I think that for me, I think Becky sort of loves the town and needs the town. Of course, she needs it because she's stealing money from it. So it's like her private ATM, but she also needs it for deep identity ways. Maybe because as somebody who lost her mother very young, it fills that hole in her. And maybe because since she's stifled in her sort of early academic and career ambitions, the sort of admiration of the town, you know, supplies what she wasn't able to get. So I guess I would say maybe it's kind of a complicated psychological mix there, you know, but I love a small town. I like a town where everybody knows you and you know their sibling, you know everyone's siblings, and you know who crashed their car on July 4th weekend, and you know whose mom makes the best lemon bars, and you know the history of all the teachers at the high school. And I don't know, I like that.
This relates to one, I'm going to skip one of these questions for a second and come back to it, but this, what you were just talking about kind of relates to another question, which is from Catherine Schaefer. She says, if Becky had other options in life instead of being marginalized by her family status or lack of it, how do you envision her life trajectory? And does it reflect how so many women in our society have so few options, even though they're so talented? It's a good question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Honestly, Catherine, I don't know. I mean, I don't think I have envisioned another life for Becky, except to think about how sad it is that she didn't have access to that other life. It's hard for me to imagine Becky without her art obsession. But say she didn't have that art obsession, I would hope that she would find a way to succeed in this town government position and rise as quickly as she did. And maybe move on, maybe move to Chicago, maybe become more, take her talents to a bigger arena. And you're right that, you know, the women in her society had so few options. That's a really good question. I guess I haven't thought too much about it, you know?
What I love about that question is it makes me feel a little bit sad, because as much as I know it's totally wrong for her to embezzle this money, if I picture her like, oh, if she had just been able to go to college as she planned,
Right.
she might have just been some, like, you know, some accountant in a giant firm somewhere, you know, living in some suburb of a big city. And which, not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but she might never have done, like, even though it's bad what she did, it's also kind of great. You know, there's a kind of like greatness to this achievement of her art collection that maybe she never would have, I don't know, achieved.
Yeah, it would have been a smaller life. I mean, she lives an enormous, she creates for herself an enormous life of, you know, what will be a historic crime that she pulled off alone. And I think, you know, of course we can agree that's bad, but we can also agree it's kind of amazing what she did, what she pulled off for so long. I think at one point she muses, she's a little bit frustrated with the town itself for not catching on to it. You know, she's a little bit disappointed that nobody else is as smart as she is. And so to me, I agree. I think it might have been a little sad to picture her with a smaller life, even if that life was, you know, sort of like a straight life, right? That she doesn't lead.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll throw you one more of these questions and then we'll start to wind down.
Good.
Liam Callanan, our buddy, said, I loved your comments about why she needs to own the art. Is it like owning books? That is, do you think for her that she likes returning to them to reappreciate them? This is a long way of saying everyone should buy a copy of your book. It's beautiful.
Oh, Liam, thank you for that nice comment and for the awesome question. Yeah, so I guess if there is one way I can kind of identify with Becky, it's in my own like mania for buying books, and for the fact that I never stop buying books. Like I constantly have too many books. If I were to like take the camera and show you guys the rest of my house, you'd see the piles everywhere. You'd see the overflowing shelves. So I too know what it's like to not be able to stop buying something that you love, even when you have too much of it. But I think in terms of going back to it, Liam asks, returning to them to reappreciate it. This is a journey that Becky takes in her collecting career. And it's knowledge she doesn't have at the beginning. She buys a few pieces and she does love them and she returns to them and she's able to get this charge from looking at them and from, you know, re-seeing them and being happy to reappreciate them. But that's not really what the big shark collectors do. You know, I guess it's, again, I come back to this word shark because, you know, if you don't, isn't it the thing with sharks where they have to keep moving or they die? Isn't that, I don't know, I'm being like a biologist now, but if you're going to be this kind of mega player in the collecting world, you have to constantly sell art and be making deals. So it's not about really returning to pieces you've loved and owned forever or reappreciating them. It's always about the hunt for something new, from what I understand. So I think that that's part of Becky's education, her sentimental education as a collector is learning that she has to let go of some of those earlier works in order to bring in new ones, in order to fund the next thing. So I think it's a complex relationship she has to owning that develops over time.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. I think, you know, we're at right about 8 o'clock and I think we've covered a lot. Yeah, and here's Daniel back to close us out. I want to just thank everybody for coming tonight, and I want to thank you, Emily, for writing this beautiful book, and which just gave me so many hours of pleasure. Anybody who wants the book should definitely order it from Boswell. I'm sure there's a link in the side thing or in the email that you got to sign up for. Yeah, there's the link in the email that you got to sign up for this event, and other cool books too that you can get from Boswell. I love being able to support Daniel and the store and everybody, all the wonderful people who work there and make these events possible.
And
Daniel,
let me break in first and say, Valerie, I am so glad you could do this and wanted to do this with me. It's been such a pleasure, and I just love talking to you. And of course, Valerie's books are amazing, and they are also at Boswell, so you should check those out. And mostly thank you to Daniel and to Boswell Books. This is an incredible store Milwaukee has. I'm a big fan and have been there many times.
Thrilled that we could put this together. We're so glad. We're so grateful for Valerie in all her conversations, and we wish you continued success. I think The book's available in hardcover now. It's we have it discounted for another week, and then it'll be going into paperback, I think, later this spring. So choose your format you like, and it's available. If you're not local, you can get it from us. We're getting book plates eventually, so you can either, if you haven't bought your book already, you can ask us to hold for a book plate. If you live nearby, we'll just ask me if you already bought the book from us, because we've sold a nice amount of copies, and we can still get you a book plate, and or get it at whatever independent store you really love. So
yeah, thank you everyone for being here tonight. This was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone. We wouldn't have a bookstore without wonderful authors, conversation partners, and of course, all of you came to the event. We definitely wouldn't have a bookstore without you. So, and Emily, you're like a combination of all three.
Thanks, Daniel.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Emily.
Thanks, Valerie.